Hi, I've got a new story for you. In this one, we deal with really complicated relationships within a family and a character who needs to make a choice. Let's listen.
My mother-in-law slapped me across the face so hard I lost my balance and fell. Then she screamed, "You and that thing you call a child should know your place in that house." My 8-year-old heard everything. 3 hours later, they went pale because that house was actually... On the day my mother-in-law Deborah and my father-in-law Dennis moved into our large house, Deborah stood in the foyer like she was inspecting a hotel she had secretly purchased. My husband Thomas was at work. My daughter Celia was upstairs doing homework, and I was carrying a basket of towels past the staircase. "This is what a Harvard degree buys," Deborah said, touching the banister. Dennis gave a little laugh and said, "We did sacrifice quite a lot for him." They had arrived with 4 suitcases, 2 garment bags, and the phrase temporary financial difficulties, but they wore no embarrassment. Deborah corrected the angle of a vase, then looked at me as if I had placed it wrong on purpose. I said, "The guest room should have everything you need." She smiled without warmth. "For now." That was the first time she made my own hallway feel borrowed. I kept walking because Celia was in the house, and because I kept telling myself a temporary arrangement was not a life sentence. Then Deborah called after me, "Rebecca, tomorrow we should discuss standards." Dennis added, "Your generation does need guidance." She said it as if the house had hired her and forgotten to tell me. By the second morning, standards had become a moving target I was expected to chase. Deborah rejected the coffee mugs, opened every drawer, and moved Celia's glittery school calendar from the fridge to a laundry room shelf because, as she said, children's clutter doesn't belong in adult spaces. Celia saw the empty spot at breakfast and quietly asked, "Where did my Mayflowers go?" I reached for the calendar, but Deborah stepped in front of me with a dish towel folded over one arm. "Grandma is helping the house look more proper." Dennis sat at the island, reading the financial pages on his tablet, and did not look up. He only murmured, "Your mother has always had an eye." That tiny approval made Deborah stand taller. I put the calendar back on the fridge and said, "Celia made it. It stays." Deborah stared at the crooked magnets like I had dropped crumbs on silk. She did not argue in front of Celia, which almost made it worse. She waited until my daughter left, then said, "You let that child run the atmosphere here." Before lunch, Celia's sneakers had been moved from the mudroom bench to a box labeled miscellaneous. The label was in Deborah's neat, sharp handwriting. On the 3rd afternoon, I came home from a grocery run and found the kitchen half emptied. Cabinet doors hung open, pantry boxes sat on the breakfast table, and Deborah was standing on a step stool, transferring spices into glass jars I had never seen before. "What are you doing?" I asked, setting the bags down hard enough for apples to roll. She didn't turn. "Making this kitchen usable." Dennis was at the sink, rinsing my measuring cups like evidence. I saw a cardboard box marked donation, then a black trash bag by the back door. Something wooden stuck out of the top. I pulled it free and stopped. It was a small framed recipe my late father had carved around the edges, the last thing he made before the stroke took his hands. Celia had learned pancake batter from that recipe, standing on a stool. The varnish was dented, but I knew every mark. Deborah glanced down and said, "Oh, that cheap trash. I threw it out. It made the whole kitchen look poor." My fingers closed around the frame. I did not yell. I set it on the counter between us. "You moved into my house 3 days ago," I said. "You don't get to throw away my things." Deborah climbed down slowly, as if my sentence had insulted her balance. "Your things?" she asked, and the air changed. Dennis dried his hands and stood beside her, not blocking me, just making a wall. His shoulder angled toward mine just enough to make the kitchen feel smaller. "Nothing here is yours," Deborah said. "This life exists because we paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for Thomas's Harvard degree. We did not do that so some poor nobody could command us around here." The words were calm, which made them land harder. I looked at Dennis, waiting for even one correction. He gave me that polite, superior expression he used when servers brought tap water. "You should remember whose family took you in," he said. That did it. Not because it was the worst thing they had said, but because they were saying it over my father's ruined frame in the middle of my torn-apart kitchen. I picked up the spice jars and placed them back in their box. Deborah grabbed one. "Don't be childish." I met her hand and moved the jar anyway. "No," I said. "This stops now." Deborah laughed once, short and bright. "There it is. The scholarship girl learned a tone." Dennis smiled at that. I carried the donation box off the table and set it on the floor by my feet. "You are guests," I said. "Not owners, not inspectors, not my supervisors." Deborah's mouth tightened, but I kept going because the line had already been crossed. "You do not move my kitchen, you do not throw away my father's things, and you do not erase Celia from rooms where she lives." Dennis sighed like I was making a scene at dinner. "Celia is not the issue." "She becomes the issue every time Deborah calls her clutter," I said. Deborah stepped closer. "That girl is 8 years old and still treated like a princess in a house she was lucky to enter." I felt my voice drop. "Do not talk about my daughter like she is a stain on your family." The back door clicked in the wind, and all three of us heard Celia's cartoon playing faintly upstairs. Then the cartoon clicked off. Deborah's face changed then. It was not anger exactly. It was offended authority, the kind people get when a door they thought was locked opens from the other side. "You need to know your place," she said, "and stop acting like you have power here." The slap came before I finished saying, "My place is wherever my child is safe." Deborah's hand cracked across my face, and I lost my balance against the open dishwasher. My hip hit the tile first, then my shoulder, and for 1 second the kitchen went silent except for a fork sliding from the rack. Dennis said, "Deborah," but not like she had done something wrong, more like she had gone off script. Deborah stood over me, breathing hard, and screamed, "You and that thing you call a child should know your place in that house!" I pushed up on one elbow and saw Celia in the doorway. My 8-year-old was holding her math workbook to her chest, frozen so completely that even her tears seemed stuck. Deborah turned and saw her too. Instead of shame, she lifted her chin. Dennis looked away first, which told me he understood and still planned to stay comfortable. My cheek burned, but Celia's face did more damage than Deborah's hand ever could. For once, I did not check Deborah's reaction first. I checked my child's breathing. I stood slowly, picked up my father's frame, and looked at my daughter. 3 hours later, both of them would go pale because the house was actually mine. Before Thomas, before that kitchen, before anyone called my daughter a thing, I was a young single mother measuring groceries in dollars and minutes. I had a bursary for graduate school, a part-time job at a campus office, and a mother who helped when her knees were not hurting too much from double shifts. Celia was 2 then, with curls that escaped every clip and a habit of falling asleep on my textbooks. At night, I worked through assignments at a cracked table while she slept in a thrift store toddler bed beside me. One Thursday, the electric bill came higher than expected, and I stood at the ATM deciding between the payment and a textbook. My mother called and said, "Buy the book. I'll bring soup." I bought a used copy with 3 highlighted chapters missing. That was how we lived. Not tragic, not glamorous, just tight. I kept a notebook of prices in my backpack because memory was too expensive to trust. Every choice touched another choice. When Celia needed new shoes, I took an extra Saturday shift filing forms for a professor who never learned my name. When people later called me lucky, I always remembered that ATM receipt. Luck had never packed Celia's lunch or paid the late fee when daycare closed at 6. I met Thomas in a university seminar room with broken blinds and a coffee machine that burned everything. I was in a master's program, and he was taking a part-time professional course while working in finance. He arrived late in a navy coat that probably cost more than my monthly food budget, apologized to everyone, then gave me the last clean mug without making a performance of it. After class, he asked if I wanted coffee somewhere with real cups. I said, "I have 20 minutes and a child pickup." He blinked, recalculated, and said, "Then the campus cart is perfect." That mattered. Men had treated Celia like a warning label before they knew her name. Thomas asked what she liked to eat, not whether her father was around. He bought a muffin and split it into a napkin for me to take to her. The muffin was $6. He did not notice. I noticed him not noticing. Then he said, "I know I sound spoiled right now." That honesty kept me from walking away. His first question on our next walk was, "How is Celia's rocket project?" The next week, he brought up the rockets before he brought up himself. I did not let Thomas meet Celia for 3 months. He accepted the rule without sulking, which was the first test he passed. The second came when my sitter canceled before a statistics review, and I had to bring Celia with crayons and a plastic bag of pretzels. Thomas saw her under the seminar table drawing purple rockets. He crouched at a distance and said, "Permission to compliment the spacecraft?" Celia looked at me first. I nodded. "It has a bathroom," she told him. "Essential for space travel," he said seriously. He did not reach for her, did not ask for a hug, did not act wounded when she hid behind my chair. The next week, he brought a pack of star stickers and handed them to me, not to her, so I could decide. Months later, Celia saved him the green chair at her preschool concert. He sat in it like a man being handed a key. When she forgot one line and waved at me instead, he clapped softly, not loudly, because she hated loud rooms. Afterward, she fell asleep against his sleeve. It was the first time I saw him choose patience over charm and win. He whispered, "I don't want to be a visitor to this." Deborah and Dennis made it clear from the first dinner that they thought I was a visitor. Thomas took me to their country club because Deborah insisted family should meet properly, and she looked at my dress before she looked at my face. "Rebecca," she said, "Thomas tells us you are studying." Dennis asked what my father did, and when I said he had passed and had worked maintenance, his smile paused. Then Deborah asked where Celia was, not because she wanted to meet her, but because she wanted to count the complication out loud. "With my mother," I said. "How practical," she replied. Thomas's oldest brother, Christopher, a surgeon, arrived late and barely sat before discussing a foundation gala. His second brother, Philip, a private equity partner, called from London and spoke on speaker about a property deal. The comparison was not accidental. Deborah kept touching Thomas's shoulder whenever one of his brothers succeeded in the conversation. When the check came, Dennis waved it away before I could even reach for my purse. "This family takes care of things," he said. Deborah watched to see if I would thank him. On the drive home, Thomas said, "They'll come around." I looked out the window and knew they had already decided what I cost. For a while, Thomas's career seemed to justify every brag Deborah had ever made. He wore tailored suits, took early trains, and came home with numbers in his head that made him quiet at dinner. Then his firm signed off on a set of compliance reports tied to client funds, and the reports were wrong. Not a little wrong. People lost money, executives blamed each other, and Thomas's signature sat on a chain of approvals like a bright red mark. He had not stolen anything. He had not plotted anything. But he had trusted people above him, rushed documents below him, and carried responsibility on paper. Lawyers came first, then settlements, then a suspension that became a resignation. One night, he sat on our bathroom floor in his shirt sleeves, phone buzzing beside him, and said, "They're going to make me the face of it." I turned the ringer off. By morning, his work email was locked. His building badge was dead, and his name had become a warning whispered inside offices that used to welcome him. He spent 2 weeks answering calls from people who sounded sympathetic until they mentioned liability. Every conversation ended with him sitting a little farther from the person he had been. The day he asked me to keep it from his parents. Rain was hitting the kitchen window of our old apartment. Thomas had not shaved in 4 days, and the mail was stacked with envelopes from attorneys, lenders, and one very polite collection department. "Please," he said, sitting across from me with both hands flat on the table. "Do not tell them." I said, "They will find out something happened." "Not from us." His voice cracked on the last word. "They only respect success. Christopher saves lives. Philip moves money around the world. If they know I lost everything, I will be the cautionary tale at every Thanksgiving until they die." I wanted to say his parents were not worth that kind of fear. Instead, I saw the man who had learned to earn love like a bonus. Celia padded into the kitchen then, dragging her blanket, and Thomas wiped his face before she could notice. That small panic decided me faster than his pleading. "It is your truth," I said carefully. "But secrets collect interest." He nodded like he understood, but he was already asking me to pay the first installment. The next morning, Deborah called to ask about his promotion prospects, and I lied before my coffee cooled. After graduation, over the next several years, I took a steady job, then built a side business fixing operational messes for small companies that could not afford full departments. Schedules, vendors, facilities, safety protocols, access systems. Boring things that saved owners money and stopped disasters before they became lawsuits. The business grew because I answered calls, wrote clean contracts, and did not panic when boilers broke at midnight. Eventually, it became my company, with employees, clients, and Marcus, a former corporate security manager who handled physical safety for our sites. Deborah had heard about my work, but she treated it like a little side project, something small and temporary that did not count beside Thomas's imagined success. I hired slowly, checked references myself, and learned that authority did not need a raised voice. Thomas started over in a school as an after-school aide, then a teaching assistant. The pay was small, but he came home lighter, carrying stories about kids who learned fractions because he explained pizza slices with paper plates. At home, he packed Celia's lunches and knew which hoodie she wore on test days. With Deborah, he still performed. If she asked about bonus season, he said, "Busy." If Dennis asked about markets, he changed the subject. They still believed he was consulting, investing, providing. Each lie sounded harmless alone. Together, they built a room none of us could breathe in. The house came after my company landed 2 long contracts, and my accountant told me I could stop renting around everyone else's instability. Thomas could not qualify for the mortgage. His credit was bruised, his legal bills had eaten the savings, and every bank saw the collapse before they saw the recovery. So the house was purchased in my name, with my down payment, my income, and my signature on every page. The loan officer congratulated both of us, and Thomas quietly corrected him. She did this. Thomas stood beside me at closing and cried in the parking lot, not because he wanted ownership, but because he knew what I had carried. "I'll tell them soon," he said. He did not. Deborah saw photos and announced, "Thomas finally has a home worthy of him." Dennis told relatives their sacrifices had paid off. At holidays, they praised the staircase, the yard, the quiet street, all as evidence that their son had risen properly. I corrected no one because Thomas squeezed my hand under tables, and because peace sometimes looks cheaper than truth. It was not cheaper. By the time Deborah threw out my father's frame, she was humiliating me inside a house that belonged entirely to me. They had mistaken my silence for dependence, and Thomas's shame had let them decorate that mistake. After the slap, I did not answer Deborah from the floor. I moved toward Celia. She backed into the hallway as if she had done something wrong, and that broke through the ringing in my ear faster than pain. "Come with me," I said, keeping my voice level. Deborah started. "Do not walk away while I am—" But I did not look at her. I took Celia's hand and led her upstairs to her room, past the family photos Deborah had straightened that morning. Celia sat on the edge of her bed, still clutching the math workbook. "Am I that?" she whispered. I knelt in front of her. "No, you are Celia. You are my daughter. You are kind, funny, stubborn, and safe." Her mouth trembled. "Grandma hates me." I wiped one tear with my thumb. What she said was cruel, wrong, and not true. Adults are responsible for their own cruelty. She looked at my cheek. "Are you safe?" I showed her how to lock the bedroom door from the inside, not because it would stop anyone determined, but because it gave her a sound of protection. "Yes," I said. "I'm going to handle this." She nodded once, then put her workbook in my lap like a shield. I placed it on her desk and stayed with her until her breathing slowed. For the next couple of hours, I did not give Deborah the confrontation she wanted. I sat with Celia, texted Thomas once, "Call me when you can, emergency." But the message sat unread while he was still supervising the after-school program, and listened to Deborah and Dennis downstairs moving through my kitchen as if noise could turn assault into housekeeping. When Celia finally let go of my sleeve, I told her to keep the door closed and call me if she heard anyone on the stairs. In the hall bathroom, I washed my face and saw the red mark had darkened across my cheek. My hands were steady, which surprised me, but only for a second. I had spent years handling emergencies that got worse when people performed panic. I took one photograph in the mirror, then another with better light. Then I called Marcus, the head of security at my company. He answered on the second ring. "Rebecca?" "I need you at my house," I said. "There has been violence. My mother-in-law slapped me, my daughter witnessed it, and they need to be removed from the property." He did not ask whether I was sure. "Are you and Celia away from them?" "Upstairs." "Stay there until I arrive. Do not touch them. Do not argue. Do you want police now?" I looked at Celia's closed door. Police meant flashing lights, questions, and a story my child would have to retell before she had even stopped shaking. "Not unless they refuse." "Understood. I'm 15 minutes out." I ended the call, changed into a clean shirt, and picked the frame back up from the hallway table. It was cracked, but not gone. I kept it with me until Marcus arrived, because proof did not always look official. Sometimes it looked like a broken piece of wood. By the time Marcus rang the bell, nearly 3 hours had passed since Deborah hit me. When Marcus rang the bell, I went downstairs with the frame in my hand. He did not storm in like a movie bodyguard. He rang the bell, waited for me to open it, and stepped inside with his hands visible and his voice even. Marcus was tall, gray at the temples, and better at silence than most people were at speeches. Deborah was still in the kitchen, repacking jars as if finishing the job proved she was right. Dennis stood near the coffee machine with his phone in his hand. I walked in behind Marcus and stopped by the doorway. "Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Whitmore," Marcus said, using their last name because he had asked me once, years ago, how formal I wanted difficult conversations. "I'm Marcus Hale. I'm head of security for Rebecca's company. She has asked me to escort you from the property." Deborah blinked. "Who are you supposed to be?" "I just told you, ma'am." She looked past him to me. "Rebecca's little business has a head of security now?" That was the first crack in the wall. Dennis heard it too, because his phone hand lowered. Marcus did not fill the silence. He simply said, "Please collect your belongings." The spoon in Deborah's hand tapped once against the counter. It was the first ordinary sound she did not control. Deborah recovered fast by choosing insult. "Head of security," she repeated, laughing through her nose. "Please, she came from nothing. What are you really, her lover?" Marcus did not react. "No, ma'am. I am here in a professional capacity." Dennis stepped forward. "You have no authority in my son's house." I felt the old pull to protect Thomas's secret, even then, even with my cheek burning. Deborah pointed at the boxes. "She is being dramatic because I improved a few things." Marcus looked at the trash bag, the open cabinets, the broken frame in my hands, then back at them. "You need to leave voluntarily." Dennis's face hardened. "We are not going anywhere." Then Deborah opened her purse and pulled out a garage remote I had not given her. Dennis added, almost proudly, "We also made a spare side door key. Families should not have to ask permission." That was the second front. Not just contempt. Access. Marcus turned slightly toward me and said, "Codes change tonight. Remote gets collected now." I said, "And the key?" My stomach tightened, not with fear, but with logistics. Codes, locks, garage access, school pickups, all the little doors people use when they think family cancels consent. Deborah snapped, "You will do no such thing!" Marcus held out his hand for the remote, and Deborah clutched it like a passport. "This is absurd," she said. "Call Thomas." "You can call whoever you want," Marcus replied. "But the property does not belong to your son." For one clean second, nobody moved. Then Deborah laughed, but the sound had lost its balance. "Of course it belongs to Thomas. She could never afford this." Dennis did not laugh. He was watching me now, calculating. Marcus said, "The property belongs to Rebecca." Deborah's eyes shifted from him to me, then to the kitchen, as if the cabinets might correct him. The color went out of her face. Dennis went pale too, his calculations suddenly having nowhere to land. "That is impossible." "It is not," I said. My voice sounded strange to me, calm and far away. "Every deed, mortgage document, insurance policy, and tax bill has my name on it." Deborah's mouth opened. No words came. Dennis whispered, "Thomas would have told us." That was when I saw the real injury, not homelessness, not fear, but the loss of the story they liked. Marcus continued, "You may leave now without further escalation. If you refuse, police can be called for trespass and for the assault Rebecca has documented." Deborah's fingers loosened on the remote. She looked toward the foyer, not at the door, but at the staircase she had admired as Thomas's trophy. They called Thomas anyway. Dennis put him on speaker before Thomas even finished saying hello. "Your wife has brought some man into your house," Dennis said. "He claims he works for her company and says we have to leave." Deborah leaned toward the phone. "She is unstable, Thomas. She threw a tantrum over garbage, and now this stranger is threatening us." I stood still because the secret was in the room like a glass on the edge of a table. Thomas was still at the elementary school, finishing the after-school program. I could hear children in the background and a door closing as he stepped somewhere quiet. "Rebecca?" he asked. "Are you okay?" Deborah talked over him. "Tell them this is nonsense." Thomas did not know about the slap yet. He knew enough from my silence. "Dad," he said, "put the phone where everyone can hear me." Dennis frowned but obeyed. Thomas took one breath. "She is telling the truth." Deborah's face drained. "What?" "The house is Rebecca's. Her company is real. If she told you to leave, then leave." The room went quiet enough to hear rain start against the windows. For the first time since they moved in, neither of them knew which script came next. Deborah found her voice by turning on him. "After everything we did for you, you let this woman humiliate us?" Thomas's reply came sharper than I expected. "You humiliated yourselves." Dennis said, "Son, be careful." "No," Thomas said. "You be careful. You are in my wife's house after disrespecting my wife and my stepdaughter." I stepped closer to the phone. "Thomas, your mother slapped me. Celia saw it." The silence afterward was different, heavy, exact. "Mom," he said, and his voice shook once before it hardened. "Pack your bags." Deborah started crying then, but the tears came late and aimed at the phone. Marcus gave them 10 minutes. He collected the garage remote, watched Dennis hand over the spare key, and stood by the stairs while they dragged their suitcases down. Deborah kept looking around like the house owed her an apology. Rain had turned the front walk glossy by the time Marcus opened the door. At the threshold, she whispered, "This is not over." I looked past her to the wet driveway. "It is for tonight." When the door closed, my whole body became very calm. The decision had already moved past anger into policy. They were never coming back. They tried to rewrite the story before their rideshare reached the main road. Thomas showed me the messages later, not to upset me, but because hiding had already done enough damage. Deborah told relatives I had thrown 2 elderly parents into the rain. Dennis said I brought some man to threaten them. They told Christopher and Philip that I had manipulated Thomas financially because a woman like me could not own a house without trapping someone. I did not chase every lie. I changed the alarm code, disabled the garage access, and had a locksmith rekey the side door in case Dennis had made more than one copy. Then I photographed everything. The red mark on my cheek, the open cabinets, the trash bag, my father's cracked frame. Marcus sent a short incident summary for my records, factual and dry. Celia watched from the kitchen table while I put her flower calendar back on the fridge. "Can they come in again?" she asked. "No," I said. "Not without my permission, and they do not have it." That answer did more for her than any speech. The house got quieter because access had consequences. That night, Celia slept with her door open again, and I counted that as the first real win. The next morning, Thomas made the smallest brave choice he had avoided for years. He did not make a grand video or beg for a family meeting. He wrote one message to Deborah, Dennis, Christopher, and Philip, then read it to me before sending. He said the house was mine, bought with my money after I carried us through the collapse of his finance career. He said he had not been a successful finance man for years. He was a teaching assistant, training toward classroom work, and happier helping kids understand money than he had ever been moving it for people who scared him. Then he wrote, "I hated that life. I hated the pressure and the pretending. I kept chasing your approval, and it nearly destroyed me. I'm not doing it anymore." He paused after reading the last lines. His thumb hovered over the screen, but he did not delete them. He hit send and set the phone face down. It buzzed almost immediately. He did not pick it up. Celia came in for cereal, and he looked at her without hiding. "I'm sorry," he told her. She nodded, small, but listening. Over the next few weeks, the world Deborah and Dennis worshipped shrank fast. Their temporary financial difficulties stopped sounding temporary once no guest room waited behind them. They moved into a weekly rental near a highway, then a small apartment far from the clubs and dinner tables where they used to perform success. Friends stopped inviting them when the story became messy. Christopher refused to pay their bills, saying he could not have his reputation dragged into bad judgment. Philip sent one cold transfer for a deposit, then wrote that future help would require a budget and accountability, which was his way of saying no. The lesson they had taught their sons came back clean. Worth was money, and failure was embarrassing. In our house, Celia's drawings stayed on the fridge. My father's frame was repaired and hung beside the pantry, not hidden, not expensive, visible. Thomas still works at the school. I still lock the doors at night. Peace here is not loud. It is the sound of nobody asking my daughter to shrink. I do not celebrate what happened to Deborah and Dennis, but I will not soften the boundary that protected us. I think I protected my daughter the only way I could, but I want to know what you think. Would you have done the same thing, or would you have handled it differently? Let me know in the comments, and if you want more stories like this, subscribe to the channel.
A quick hello from the writer. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe and also check out my other channel where I narrate my stories myself. See you on the next one.